So worldwide smartphones, again, Symbian's still pretty strong, but losing a bit. iOS, again, still losing a bit, and Android obviously taking a large number of that. Worldwide, Android gets a bit more complicated. In China, there are a number of different flavors of Android that aren't even necessarily the cupcake donut froyos. China Unicom and China Mobile have their own flavors that they've asked developers to make. They run on different chipsets than the devices here in the US and Europe. So there's plenty of changes there. I'm hoping it's clear that the landscape is definitely fragmented. So as a designer or developer, it's kind of a nightmare. But I'll tell you that your design should probably be a little bit of a nightmare too. So I'm a proponent of designing for the device that you're going to be shipping to your customers. So your design should be as fragmented as the market is. I'll tell you that I like to think of designing with a benchmark in mind. So what's your hero or your target device that you want to deploy a particular experience on? And with benchmarks, really we're talking about screen sizes. What dimensions is this thing? That's going to help you determine your touch targets and whatnot. Screen resolution, is it HDPI? Which flavor? All of those types of things we just talked about. OS and versioning, is it iOS? Is it Android? Which version of Android do you want to target? Is it a tablet? Is it a phone? What's our processing speed? And then you get to the fun stuff, input requirements. So does the device have a keyboard? Does it not have a keyboard? Does it have a 5-way? Do I need to design for highlight states and things like that in UI? Does it need to have a camera, voice input, other peripherals? And does it need to be upgradable? Do we care if we target a Claire and someone upgrades their phone to Gingerbread, will our UI still work okay? We tend to look for the largest addressable market for an application, and then define that as a clear benchmark. Like I say, we kind of want to try to serve the fewest number of people with each benchmark. So as tight as you can be about your design target, the better. That's going to allow you to optimize your design for the largest amount of people. But the fewest number of people with each benchmark. It's kind of a weird statement, right? If you imagine that if you're serving iOS 4, you know that you're going to hit a very large swath of people. If you're thinking that you're going to go after, say, Froyo, we talked about earlier, well, Froyo with an 854 480 is probably the largest market you could try to go after with Android on Froyo. If you try to go after all of Android, you're going to end up with an experience that's a little strange, a little subpar. You're not going to optimize for anybody, and everybody's going to have a little bit of a subpar experience. And the way to do that in this kind of fragmented world is to, what I would say, reorganize your applications as you move between screen sizes, as you move between device types. Use paradigms that most people are familiar with, that the OS provides, and make it easier for yourself to develop and design. There's really no reason to reinvent the way settings work in an application. iOS has settings, there's a design pattern that's already established. Android has a design pattern for settings. If you use iPhone settings style in Android, someone who uses an Android phone and has never used iOS has no idea the way those settings work. So playing with the actual operating system and the operating system components, particularly if you're developing native, is a great way to do that. So let's start with some simple examples. Pictures, fine. So this is Twitter for iPad. Twitter for iPad. So I think most people are probably familiar with this app at some level. Basically, we've got application organization on the left, inboxes, folders, things like that, navigation within the app. And then on the right, we've got the content listing. Once I select a piece of content, I get another panel, that's the content details. The iPad has a little bit of an advantage. With its big screen, it goes ahead and loads in whatever my particular tweet that I'm reading is talking about. So it's taking advantage of the larger screen to show me more content. And then I can easily kind of go back and forth between the content list and the content itself. I like to think of this as kind of the ABC of the app. So the A is kind of the core navigation that we have, B is my content listing, and C is the actual content itself. So we're going to look at this pattern a couple different ways. This is Twitter for OS X. So again, it's got its core application navigation on the left, content on the right, A and B. What's interesting about Twitter's desktop, they decided not to build in the detail view, the view to kind of see more information about the tweet. Because you already have a web browser, you probably have it open already. They just launched a new tab in your web browser and you go read about it there. Which is actually, I think, a much better use of probably Twitter's time, is to optimize this application as good as it can be, and trying to embed a browser inside some other application. Now, if you look at iPhone, you don't see multiple columns because iPhone, generally speaking, doesn't do multi-column UIs. You see their general usual account listing at the beginning, just like email. So this pattern is almost identical to the pattern for email on the iPhone. Tabs are at the bottom. There's no back button, there's an accounts thing. And again, when you get into the tweet, there's not really enough room to load the tweet and the actual content in there, so they don't. You go to another screen for that, which is, again, following the iPhone paradigm. Again, it's iOS to iOS, but they've really optimized the iPad in a way that just reorganizes this information. So again, the A, B, and C. This is Twitter for Android, which is pretty similar to the iPhone, actually. Now, what's interesting is they put their tabs, what we saw last time from the iPhone, on the top. Android puts all their tabs on the top of the screen, so it's kind of where they go. There's a lot of applications that you design an application for iOS, you put tabs at the bottom, then you port it over to Android, and tabs are at the bottom. But Android doesn't put the tabs at the bottom, so it's a weird place for people that are looking for how to navigate an application, and it changes. They only see this one. They don't see the iOS version. So, there's no sense in optimizing an Android application for iOS. So this is, again, the A, B, and C for Twitter and iPad. Now, try to take another example here. This is my fake email account. So generally, we've got my accounts at the top. We've got a list of messages. I select a message. I see the details. Everybody's probably seen this. Wrong way. So again, the A, B, and C of an application. This is email on Honeycomb for Gmail. Again, they've got their list of files, folders, applications. They've got their content on the right. Their A and B. They split it up, and then the next screen, they slide the whole thing over when you select a message, and they show you the list of content, and then the individual messages. So that's their B and their C. So again, they've just taken the same UI from a phone that we saw. There we go. It's optimized, screen-to-screen type interaction. It's optimized for the smaller screen, and they lay it out in a slightly different way. So it's not a completely different application. They're not reinventing the way that people are interacting with their email. You go to accounts to deal with accounts, to deal with your message list. They just reorganized it a little. Last example. This is Sparrow. Anybody seen Sparrow on OS X? It's a Gmail client for OS X. It's kind of nice because it takes Twitter and turns it into email. So if you look at the right column or left column there, we've got the application functions and navigation. And then on the right, we've got the content list, or A and B. Then you can even turn it into a 3-pane UI and open up and give your details. So now it looks a little bit like Outlook or Entourage, but now it's set up like Twitter. And I've got this 3-pane UI that's really easy to use. And you can imagine that they could take this exact same thing and port it onto the iPad following the same pattern that Twitter had, and it would work great. So if you think about the way that mail works on an iPad, it certainly could look like that, but it could also look like this. And that, depending on what their initial target was, so if they targeted the desktop like this, and they said, we want to take this same experience, we think our Sparrow users are familiar with this experience, we want to port it onto the iPad, they can still follow an existing interaction paradigm that exists on the iPad and use it for email, where you're constantly going from screen to screen to screen. If anybody ever feels like you've traversed like half a mile on an iPhone just to get 2 screens down in an email, it can feel a little weird. Multipane, I think, does a better job of some of that. It also works really well on TVs, which tend to have a wider screen. It works really well on tablets, which again, wider screens. So Multipane is great for our large screen devices, but it also has a good, easy way to move it back into a phone, like we saw earlier with the email example. Grid layouts are, I would consider, pretty good UI construct for large screen devices as well. But they're really great for devices that have what I would consider indirect and direct manipulation. So I can touch anywhere on YouTube here and select a video. If I have a remote control and I've got to move a highlight around, grids aren't necessarily the best solution. There are other solutions you can do. So depending on what your interaction mechanism is, you can actually have a better experience with a grid or potentially with a list or search or something else. Cover flow is the beautiful cover flow is out there. It's actually probably the worst thing to interact with. Certainly with a mouse, certainly with swipe, because it takes forever. I want that thing way down there at the end. Or I have to grab this tiny little slider bar, slide it way over there. It's just not a great experience to interact with, even though it looks really nice. I will say that it works really well for devices like this. So if I have a remote control and it's IR based or something else, I have to just flip one by one. Because it gives me a highlight and focus, I could extend that information, show other details about this particular album, allow people to jump into songs. The whole idea is you have to flip this thing over to get to the songs for it is kind of silly. Why not show the songs? Why not let me navigate down to it? I think that's probably one area where if you do have an interaction that uses a remote control or a highlight focus type system, it's definitely better, like a jog dial is another example. These can be really powerful. Okay. So interaction patterns that work well across the screens. Again, multi-pane is great. Grid layouts are great. Carousels are okay. Carousels are the ones that I see most often requested. So as a designer, everyone says, I want it to be sexy, I want it 3D, can you make it spin? And I try to tell people no. Because generally they don't work as well. For users, they're inefficient, and efficiency matters a lot. So I think that the idea across this fragmented market is to keep your ideas and intents of your applications the same, but really try to change your design a little bit so that it matches the right platform.